ahead and begin. Vice Chair Smith, as you are the Vice Chair from the 2019 Audit Committee, I don't know if you want to kick us off or if you'd like me to start the meeting.
I'm happy to. I think we start with the roll call.
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Smith?
Here.
Tyson?
Here.
Marshall?
Here.
Thank you. All are present.
Great. Then next we have public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. If you are a member of the public, please raise your virtual hand if you would like to speak to items not on the agenda. And I see no hands, so we'll move on to the next item, which is to approve the minutes of the February 5th, 2020 Audit Committee meeting on the consent calendar. So are there any motions or discussion for the consent calendar?
I can move approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, so we have Audit Committee member Marshall moving to approve. Do we have a second?
Are there just 3 of us in this committee?
Yes.
Well, then I'll second it, but I don't know if I'm supposed to vote because I wasn't at that meeting. This is my first meeting.
You can recuse if you're comfortable, or you can take a quick minute and look at the packet. And then while you're considering that, I will ask if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on the consent calendar. I don't see any. Back to the committee for approval of the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes of the February 2020 Audit Committee meeting, please indicate so by saying, oh, no, we need to do a voice vote. Okay, so Andrea, would you please do a voice vote?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Smith?
Yes.
Tyson?
Yes.
Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries unanimously.
The next up is to select the 2020 SVCE Audit Committee Chair and Vice Chair. So do we have any nominations from the 3 committee members who are here?
Oh, I nominate Commissioner Smith.
For
Whatever you
okay.
for chair, yes.
I'll second that.
Okay. I would be happy to serve in that capacity. Are there any nominations, either self or of other persons, for the role of vice chair?
I guess it's tough when there's only 3 of us.
I would like to nominate Elaine as vice chair.
I'll second that. Elaine, are you willing to serve as vice chair?
Sure, that's fine. Yes, be happy to.
Okay, so Andrea, do we need to vote individually on each one?
We can take them as one if you'd like, if one would like to make one full motion to the appointees.
Okay, so I can.
Oh, I can make the motion to appoint the nominees as for chair and vice chair positions.
Second.
I'll second that.
Okay, then before we vote, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? I see you would raise your virtual hand if you'd like to speak. I don't see any hands raised. Clerk, would you mind conducting the vote?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Smith?
Yes.
Tyson?
Yes.
Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. Your chair for 2020 Audit Committee will be Nancy Smith, and your vice chair will be Elaine Marshall.
Thank you, everybody. Moving right.
May I ask a question of Andrea? I am sorry. I feel very unprepared. Was there an agenda sent out?
Yes, we did send
If
the
so,
agenda. I'll forward it to you.
was it sent by you though?
Yes.
Oh, well, I can't seem to find it. All right.
No worries.
Well,
I'll send it your way.
okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. Typically in the audit committee, we are well informed during the meetings of what it is we are auditing. So that's really helpful. So moving on to the item 4 already.
Nancy, could I just interrupt for a second?
Sure.
That'll take 2 seconds. We passed over item 2, which is a CEO update.
Oh, sorry.
No. I don't have an update. Just for the purpose of minutes, we can just call it that and move on to item 4.
Okay.
Just,
My
yeah.
apologies.
No, just, yeah.
Okay,
Just
thank you for pointing that out. So we'll let the minutes show there is no CEO update, and we will move on to item 4, financial audit kickoff.
Okay.
Staff report.
I'll start that one off. Don Rhodes, interim CFO. And I'd like to introduce to you Brett Bradford. He's with the firm of Pacenti and Brinker, and they will be auditing SVC's financial records for this past fiscal year. You may ask what we're meeting on this for when the fiscal year hasn't ended yet, but it's always good to bring this to the audit committee first in case there's any questions you have or any concerns that Brett and his team can focus on. And also there's some work that they can do even before the year, the fiscal year ends. So we wanted to get that started. But there will be another opportunity after the audit is done. There'll be another opportunity. We'll bring back the results of that to this committee in a few months before we take it to the full board for approval. So with that, I want to introduce Brett, and if he could just walk through the process and maybe answer any questions the committee might have.
Like Don said, it's great to get ahead of the game here. Your fiscal year ends 9/30, so meeting in advance to establish communications with the current audit committee is wonderful. We've got 3 audits under our belt, going into our 4th, I believe. Nothing has been come up during these audits that has been too concerning. Minor issues only have been discussed with the audit committee over the past few years. To give you a little bit of background, I'm the partner with Pacenti and Brinker for all the governmental engagements. We're working with about 5 or 6, might be up to 7 CCAs now. So we're pretty familiar with them, and we've been working with Maher all this time. Mike's on now, so I can see. And that's gone pretty well. The process has gone timely and gotten done, pretty regularly through all those years. I don't know, Don, were you planning on today having a closed session with me and the committee?
So that my understanding, of course I wasn't here last year, but my understanding was that was something that took place at the second audit committee meeting, but whatever the committee wishes, but that would be after the audit has gone through. Then yeah, it's common to have a kind of a closed session, meaning staff would not be a part of it, so that the committee could talk directly with the auditor. I think that's typically done after the audit's done, so you can discuss any issues that might have come up, but whatever the committee wishes to do.
Yeah, definitely for communication from us to the committee. Once we get into things, that makes more sense. For the communication the other way, that the committee, if the committee has any concerns in a particular area, we'd want to know about that at the front end so that we could incorporate any concerns into our planning procedures, essentially. So something to think about. I think usually we probably do at least 3 meetings, and obviously with everybody using Zoom, it's even easier now. So we can have additional ones kind of when it's convenient for everybody if we do want to cover that. Like I said, we are ahead of the game though this year with meeting early. I think usually we really start in earnest approximately 6 weeks after your year end. Mr. Maher and I will be corresponding in the next couple weeks, probably on the more exact timing to nail that down. And then we get the audit done, I'd say probably about 4 to 6 weeks once we start. That gets done fairly quickly. Some important things, that I would point out to the audit committee is making sure that you have an opportunity to review the draft financial statements and make sure that you don't have any questions. So as we go through the process, we just want to make sure that the committee gets looped in a timely way with the draft, and that along with the draft is the management's discussion analysis at the front of the financials, which is possibly even more important since you have a bit more latitude there on what that looks like in terms of the form and content. So getting the committee looped in there is important. And then of course, any concerns either direction, we want to get in front of right away. So I don't have any right now in that regard. But if we do, we want to make sure that we'll correspond. Of course, if anything significant comes up during the audit, we're required to reach out to the committee right away to let them know. But nothing like that has occurred in the past.
Hey, Brett, can you give a really broad sketch of what the audit would cover, like internal control checking and transaction sampling and that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah, it's a financial statement audit. It's not an operations or efficiency audit. So we're independent of that financial statement production process, which is appropriate. We don't want to be auditing our own work. And then we apply procedures to the financial statements. We use a certain materiality to decide the level of procedures. It involves a lot of confirmations directly with financial institutions for cash, investments, and debt, things like that. And then we do a sample of revenues through the customers. And then we also apply a fair amount of what we call analytical procedures to revenues, because obviously the customer base is massive. So we can get a lot of assurance of that through, not just through testing a massive sample. We do a little bit of that, but also more with our analytical procedures, things like that. And we also have to look at internal controls such that they are relevant to the preparation of the financial statements, and also internal controls over assets that are reflected in the financial statements as well, such as cash. So that includes basic things like, procedures for getting money out of the organization, and then what are the procedures for getting cash into the organization. Those are very well defined and no issues in the past there, but those things are covered. And then kind of looking at year-end balance sheet reconciliations as well, the controls around that, and those type of things. So it's not an internal control audit, but we do have to look at internal controls surrounding those significant processes that are involved with the preparation of financial statements.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other staff comments before I hand it over to members of the audit committee for questions?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Do any members of the audit committee have any questions?
Hello, this is my first meeting, and I am just joining this committee, but I have been part of hiring audits for nonprofits for many years. I'm currently the chair of the audit committee of one nonprofit, and I'm currently treasurer of another. So this is the things I just heard sound very familiar to me. My only question, and I'm sorry I don't have background information, but I did read I have got the agenda, and thank you, Andrea. So I'm a little bit caught up here. And can you tell me how long you have been auditing? And I'll ask the rest of the audit committee, do we have a policy already on how long we keep an auditor? How many years?
I'll answer the first part. I'd have to go back and tell you the exact number of years. I believe that we're going into our 4th audit now. And I think that we're on an extension for the contract right now, but then it will come up for renewal either next year or the year after that. Kevin, I know you've been looking at that, so you might be able to speak specifically there. Under the California law, you have to, there is a requirement to rotate the audit partner every 5 years, but not the auditor per se. So got another audit partner here who's heavily involved with governmental. When the time comes, as I time out, he'll come in if we are selected in the future.
Thank you.
And just to confirm what Brett said, it is that that's 5 years.
Kevin, we can't hear you.
Kevin
Please
can't
go
hear.
again.
I asked Kevin the same question a little bit earlier, and after this year, there's 2 years remaining. So yeah, as Brett said, as long as they change the audit partner, we're probably okay. CCAs are kind of a unique niche, and so yeah, so I'm not sure there's a lot of firms. So I think you'd want to be cognizant somewhat of how long, but at this point, I think we're at 4 years. I think there's this year and then 2 more, so 6 or 7 years. As long as they change the auditor, we would be okay in that regard.
Good to know. Thank you. No other questions for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Committee Member Tyson. And Mr. Armstrong, did you have something to say, and can we hear you?
Switching headsets, hopefully you can hear me now.
Nope.
I can hear you. It's very faint.
Tiny.
While you're checking your setup, I had a question. In terms of reviewing the draft financial statements, when do we expect those would be provided to the audit committee? General public, I guess, I presume, or?
Yeah, I'm thinking, and like I said, Mike Maher's on the call too, so he could chime in. We're putting him on the spot a little bit, but I think probably looking at about mid-November. Does that sound about right in there, Mike?
Yeah, that sounds about where we were at last year. I believe we wrapped up completely before the holidays. Is that true? So yeah, several weeks before that, we're going to be circulating the draft. And typically, before we even provide the draft to the auditors, we've gone through a pretty solid, detailed internal review. So probably about the time we send it to the auditors, we'll send it to the audit committee, or maybe slightly in advance, depending on how much lead time we have, how much time is remaining in the audit. But yeah, that mid-November, it's easy to say that's going to work out. I think it will, just because this year is pretty similar to last year. I don't foresee too many hiccups. We can leverage what we've done already. So yeah, long answer to that sounds about right, around that time.
Okay, and then the turnaround time would be 3 weeks, something like that.
Turnaround time from?
For us to review it before we meet, or?
Yeah. Well, before we finalize at least, before there's an opinion letter, I think that would be fine. So again, you guys are probably going to be chopping this thing up. It's going to be a few things here and there that could be easily changed. So yeah, that you should definitely have that time before we completely wrap. Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Armstrong, any luck on your?
For me now.
It's faint, but go ahead.
Oh, that's so strange. I'm gonna have to have Nick look at my computer. But yes, just to confirm, the auditing firm will be competitively bid at least every 5 years. So.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. I don't see any other questions from the commission members, so I'm going to committee members. So I'll look to the members of the public to see if anybody has any comments on this item. And I don't see any. So I will turn it back to the committee and see if anybody else has any questions that they've thought of in the last 5 seconds. Don't see anything. Okay, so we have one final item on the, the next item on the agenda is an update from the, on our IT controls. So I will turn it over to staff for a staff report.
So Andrea, could you queue up the slides? Thank you so much. This is Kevin Armstrong, Administrative Services Manager. Thank you, Audit Committee, for allowing us to present today. I'll be speaking very briefly about the overview of the IT audit, and then our management analyst, Nick Zanato, will go into some detail about the specifics. So as you all, are very familiar with, this year that we're in, 2020, has been a year of unknown and unplanned occurrences. And so in March, along with the rest of the working world, we pivoted from 100% in-office work to 100% remote in a very short amount of time. That was right during the time that we were getting the IT audit set to be released for its RFP. But of course that, changed the underlying structure of what we were going to audit. And so we needed to rethink sort of how to approach the IT audit for a distributed equipment scenario. So, that brought up some new issues. We were no longer on an internal SVCE network here at the office. We, are going to be more distributed and therefore more exposed to a variety of attacks and vulnerabilities. And home networks are, sort of fundamentally outside our control in a lot of ways. So we had to sort of rethink with, the audit process, how to approach that. Next slide, please. As a result, instead of launching in March as we had anticipated, we pushed back and made some adjustments to the recruitment or the competitive bidding process and began the audit process on June 1st, so a couple months later than we had originally intended. So based on that, both the timing and the scope, we changed overall kind of how this audit functioned compared to how it was originally planned. And I will hand the discussion over to my colleague, Nick, to speak in a little bit more detail about those changes.
Thank you, Kevin. So this is our third annual IT audit. So years 1 and 2, we're kind of in our startup phase. So we're just kind of getting the audit to see where we stood. Year 3, we decided to do a deeper dive and to really analyze and go deeper dive into what our security posture is. As the company grows, our security posture needs to grow as well. So we did add to the audit a focused security assessment, which is more into IT policies and new policy development. We have our cookie cutter policies from day one. We've tailored or we tweaked them over the years, but now we really need to see, is it enough for where we are in our 3rd year? We added more in-depth penetration and vulnerability testing. We did the basics the 1st year and the 2nd year. This year is deeper dive, a lot more reports to analyze, and they looked at wireless networks, firewall settings, things that we touched on years 1 and 2, but not in depth like we are going this year. And then we added the demand for more deliverables from the auditor. So it's one thing for them to do the audit and do the testing, but what does that really mean to us? We want to see the details, we want to see the reports and be able to share those with this committee later this year. We also added anything about work from home or COVID recommendations that they have, being a security company. Are the things that we didn't know about. We didn't know anything about COVID back in March, right? But going forward, are there things that we need to do to our environment to handle those new occurrences for us? Next slide, Andrea, please. So this is a table that shows what we did in last year's audit versus what we're doing in this year's audit. You can see there's a lot more bullet points in there that we are addressing. The audit itself finished last Friday. I have yet to see any of the findings. So from what I heard from the auditors, there's a lot of reports that we will be getting starting this week, later this week. But as of right now, I have not seen anything, but they did say it's pretty favorable from just on the initial look through. Next slide, Andrew, our last slide. So the status where we're at right now, again, is the audit itself and a focused security assessment has completed. The initial reports should be starting to arrive to me this week. What we'll do at that point is evaluate the findings, set up a remediation plan. So we'll address all the findings that they could come up with, have a plan of action, and then we'll actually do the implementation of the remediation steps. So if it's fixing vulnerabilities, if it's fixing firewall configuration, something like that, we will have that done. And then our next committee meeting, which I believe is probably later this year, we will present the findings in a report to the committee. And then we'll go over any findings that are relevant and also have a plan to kind of going forward. And then At the end of this year, we will plan for year 4 audit, which we will get back into our normal timeline, which was start in February, be done in April, and then report back to the committee either this time or I think it was earlier last year. So we'll get back onto our normal schedule if all things work out that. So that's the end of the report. Is there any questions? I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you for the report. I've seen this a little bit, the much shorter list last year, but I wondered if any of the other members of the committee had any questions. Yeah, committee member Tyson.
You can't call me George.
Okay, fine.
So I'm sorry, I'm certainly no expert on this. Nick, I didn't see anything that told me about using a virtual private network or something in terms of security of access. Is that how you manage things? I'm curious also how people share documents. Do you use an external tool like Box or Dropbox or one of those others? Or SharePoint? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we do use Box for our file server and all sharing. And then we do have a VPN set up, which is one of the things we had to do on day 1 of work from home, is we had to set that up. Not all staff needs VPN, just there's a certain, maybe 2 or 3 tools that we use for that. So maybe a third of staff has to VPN in. Otherwise, with Office 365 and Box, we can pretty much work outside of the VPN.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you. George, any other questions from the committee members? Well, I'm very much looking forward to the result of the findings. And I would just maybe ask, what was your biggest learning or your biggest roadblock that you had in moving to work from home?
Or fear.
Well, the fear of the unknown is the biggest thing. The roadblock was some of the tools that we had worked great for all machines being on our network. Now, with machines being all dispersed throughout, we actually updated a few of our tools to be able to monitor machines that aren't on the network anymore. So if they're on their home Wi-Fi network, our tools now do monitor traffic coming in and out. We updated our endpoint protection to be able to track machines that are not tracked, but to monitor machines that aren't on in the network, in the company network on site. So tweaking our tools a little bit to adjust for this newness was a challenge, which kind of made the audit take a little longer. Plus also the auditors are working from home, which means their availability isn't always like in the office 8 hours a day. So sometimes they're doing stuff at 2 o'clock in the morning and our machines aren't online anymore because they're at home. So just kind of working through all those newfound things was challenging. But I think after the first couple of weeks working from home with the VPN set up and our tools changing, things are pretty quiet now, I should say. Well, I shouldn't say that, but it's better now than it was back in March. Let's say that.
Yeah, so I guess that does raise an interesting question. It seems like, I mean, do you track the percentage, or do you allow, people are using their own machines to access the agency's data? Are you allowing unmanaged machines to have access, and you have the monitoring tools you need for that to work efficiently and safely?
So we have the monitoring tools that are set on the company laptops. You can get email and those things on any device, mobile or laptop. And data is locked down by user account. So if somebody shouldn't have access to a certain folder, then they don't have access. So between policies and training, we do have that lockdown. But non-company machines can still be used in theory, and our tools are tracking the company machines. But we do know who accesses Box by logging in, and we can get more information from that if we needed to.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from the committee members? I don't see any. So moving to the members of the public, I don't see any hands raised. If members of the public wish to speak, you can raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, the next item I think is, hold on. I went away. Let's see. It is committee and staff remarks. So are there any wrap-up comments from the committee or staff at this point? Yeah, Gresh won't even look at me or at the screen, so I guess there's nothing.
No, I was actually going to say you should make sure that you announce at the board meeting that you ran this meeting in 32 minutes and you were done. Make sure you communicate that to our board president.
I don't like to let
appreciated it.
I don't like to let moss grow. Let's put it that way.
I'm good with that.
Not that we're going to, you know, shortchange the discussion or anything, but the next item is adjournment. So seeing no other hands raised and virtually or on video, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned at 3:03 p.m.